Hi, my name is Sam Morgan, and this is going to be part 2 of a tutorial series where I show you how to make your own loading indicator with HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. So in our last video, we got up and running with Visual Studio Code. In this video, we're actually going to get started implementing our project. Excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to File and create a new folder. I'm just going to call this Loading Indicator. And in here, I'm just going to make another new subfolder. I'm going to go to File, New Folder, and I'm just going to call this Part 1. Go ahead and close that window. From here, I'm going to go over to Visual Studio Code. And the first thing we want to do is come over to this Extensions tab right here. I'm going to search for something called HTML5 Boilerplate. Coming to this first option right here, HTML boilerplate, and I'm just going to hit install. That should be installed now. From here, I'm going to make a new file, and we're going to save this as index.html in our part 1 folder. I'm going to go over to desktop, into loading indicator, into part 1, and I'm just going to say index.html. Perfect. Go ahead and save. Now that we have our extension installed, we should be able to type out HTML and see an option for our HTML5 boilerplate extension. I'm just going to click on that, and as you can see, we get some nice boilerplate here for our HTML page. Next up, what I want to do is give this a title. Let's just say Loading Indicator. Command S to save. From here, we can start making our first HTML tags. So I'm going to kick things off by making a div, and we can just give this a class of page container. Page container, perfect. Now in here we want another sub div to house our loading indicator, so we can just call this div class page loader. And in here we want a couple of things. We want a div to house the animation for the loader, and an H1 for the text that shows how much the page has loaded. So I'm going to make one div right here. I'm going to give this a class page loader animation. Page loader animation, perfect. And below we can just make an H1 and give this a class of maybe page loader percentage. That sounds good. Page loader percentage. Perfect. Next up, we can keep going inside of our page loader animation div right here. The next thing we want to do is to make one main container for each of the dots inside that make up our animation. So I'm just going to give this div a class, we say page loader hyphen dots. That sounds like a good name. And in here, we can make a series of dots inside of our div with the class name page loader dots. And I'm just going to give this a class page loader dot, not plural but singular. Copying that 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Command S to save. The next thing we can do is go ahead and initialize our page loader percentage to just 1%. And another thing we want to do is link to some style sheets that we haven't created just yet. I'm going to say css/normalize.css. We can copy this a couple more times. The next CSS page file we are going to link to is called loader.css, and the last one is just going to be main.css. Command S to save that. Now with that, what we want to do is go ahead, I'm going to quit Visual Studio Code. I'm going to come into my loading indicator folder, and I'm just going to drag the entire part 1 folder onto the Visual Studio Code icon. From here, I'm going to create another new folder using the folder icon inside of part 1, and we are just going to call this CSS, okay? Now in here, we can create a few new files. The first one I'm going to create is normalize loader.css. The next one is going to be, into the CSS folder here. The next one is going to be loader.css. And the last one, just like we named it, main.css. Main.css. Great. Now, this normalize.css is actually a reset style sheet we're going to be getting off of the internet. So what I'm going to do for now is go ahead and minimize my Visual Studio Code window, come over to Google, and I'm going to Google normalize.css. Coming over to this first link here, normalize CSS, and I'm going to download version 8.0.1. From here, I'm going to hit Command A to select everything, Command C to copy. I'm going to come back over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to hit Command V to paste. From here, we can just Command S to save. Now, if you're unfamiliar with normalize.css, it's really nothing fancy. All it is something that makes sure that our page renders the same in every single browser. With that mentioned, I'm going to close normalize.css, close loader.css, and we're going to focus our attention in main.css. In here, I'm going to kick things off by styling our page container class, so page container. On here, we want a display of flex, and we want an align items center, as well as justify content center to make sure that the content inside of page container is centered both horizontally and vertically. The next thing we can do is give this a background color. Maybe we can just set it to navy for now, just to make sure everything is working correctly. We can give it a height of 100% of the viewport height and a width of 100% of the viewport width. Command S to save. From here, it would probably be a good idea to make sure everything is working. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and quit Safari. I'm going to minimize my Visual Studio Code window. I'm going to come into my loading indicator folder, into part 1, and I'm just going to drag index.html onto my Safari icon. And as you can see, we get our navy blue background just as specified in our style sheet. Now that we can see that that's working, I'm going to quit Safari, minimize my Finder since I have that open, and come back over to Visual Studio Code. From here, I'm going to direct my attention into loader.css. The first thing I'm going to do in here is kick things off by styling our page loader class. So page loader, we want this to have a display of flex, and flex direction set to column. The reason is because we want our animation and our text to stack one on top of the other. Next up, we want to style our page loader animation class. Animation. On here, we also want this to be display of flex, align items center, and justify content center like we previously did, justify content center. We can give this a background color of maybe aquamarine, just for now. We can give this a height of 200 pixels, that seems like a good number, and a width of 200 pixels. Command S to save. Once again, I'm going to check to make sure that everything is working as expected in the browser. I'm going to minimize Visual Studio Code, come into loading indicator, into part 1, and drag index.html onto the Safari icon. As you can see, we get our 200 pixel by 200 pixel box with a background color aquamarine. This is working just great. I'm going to minimize this, close my Finder, and come back over to Visual Studio Code. From here, What I'm going to do next is start styling my page loader dots. So page hyphen loader hyphen dots. And on here, we can just give this a default background color. So background color, just a dummy color for now, black. We can give it a border radius of 50%, so it's nice and circular. We can give it a height of about 10% of its 200 pixel parent, a position relative, since we're going to be moving its children absolute to it, and a width of 10% as well. Command S to save. And just below that, we can style our singular page loader dot class. So page, hyphen loader hyphen dot. And on here, we can give this another dummy background color. So we can just say red for now. We can give it a border radius of 50%, just like, so it, I'm sorry, I can't speak today. So it's round, just like its parent. You can give it a height of 100%, and it will be 100% of its parent, which is 10% of 200 pixels. We want to give it a position of absolute, a left of 0, a top of 0, and a width of 100%. Go ahead and Command S to save everything. Now, this next set of styles might be a little bit tricky to conceptualize, so I'm going to show you what's going to happen here inside of the browser. If we refresh, you can see we have our red dots. So what's going on here is we have one parent that is 10% of its 200 pixel parent. That means this dot right here is 1/10 of this container. So in order for one of these dots, we want one of these dots to be sitting on the very edge over here. We would have to shift it over by 100% of its width 5 times. So let's go ahead and try that. What I'm going to say right here is page loader hyphen dot colon first child. And what we're going to say here is translate negative 500%. If I Command S to save and come back, you can see one of the dots is now aligned on the very edge of our aquamarine box. For the second child, we want it to be in between the center and this dot right here. So how we would do that is just go ahead and copy this. We want to translate negative 250%. Command S, come back over here. Oops, I actually made a mistake there. We don't want that to be the first child. We want this to be nth child of 2, and set this to be negative 250%. Command S. Now you can see our next child is centered between this dot and this dot here in the center. Now we actually have 2 more dots that we want to move around. For the next one, nth child of 3, we want to move this positive 250%. That is saved. If I come over here, now this is aligned between the edge and the center dot on this side. And the last one, nth child of 4, we just want to nth child of 4, we just want to translate this positive 500%. As you can see, we have our dots translated, and it's the parent of the dots is revealed. It has a background color of black. Now, one other thing that would be nice is you can see down here we have our loading percentage. You can barely see it because of its black color. So maybe we can both center this and give it a nice white color or off-white color to make it more visible. So right below that last class, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say page loader hyphen percentage. We want a couple of styles on here. We can give this a color of FE, FE, FE. That is a nice off-white. And we just want to say text align center. Command S to save. And if I come back over to my browser and refresh, this looks much nicer. It is centered and it is much more visible. Alright, I think that's a good place to stop for this video. I will see you in the next one. Stay tuned.